All right.
All right.
A few seconds.
Good to go. Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Impact Collective Fireside Chat again. This is our last Fireside Chat, but not the least. We have amazing speakers today waiting for you. People who never been to Impact Collective session before, I'm just going to give a quick introduction about Impact Collective, and then we're just going to jump into the conversation. So my name is Songi. I'm a partner of Impact Collective. Impact Collective is a community-driven investment and accelerator program that is run by a group of people as a beautiful initiative that brings impact and the startup scenes comes together. So what we do and our mission is basically bringing impact startup and a business-focused startup, meet them together and actually bridging them as they can learn each other and that they can equip impact and business together. And I think Asia is a quite interesting market because we're creating a lot of problem, but we also create a lots of solution. So we want to really, really enhance those dynamic and interaction in the Asia Pacific community. And we now have 1,500 people in our community is really supporting the startup and ecosystem itself. So you guys, please check it out. Our website, impactcollective.earth, and plus our online platform for community, impactcollective.community. Also, impact community and impactcollective.community. Yeah, that's our online platform website. Yeah, without further ado, I will introduce today's moderator, and then moderator can actually introduce our speaker as well. So, Yoseph.
Thanks, Songi. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining our awesome discussion. I'm super excited to have this conversation with Jason Fried. I think some of you know of him or his work. Jason founded Basecamp, is the CEO of the organization. It's kind of been going for 20 years now. And you guys might have used Ruby on Rails, which is a product of Basecamp, as well as the product Basecamp itself. Hey.com is an amazing email app that I've been using for the last year plus, and it just changes how you think about email. And it's just done a lot of amazing things, and we'll talk about Jason's book, Rework, as well. We're just chatting about the Korean version of that is available, and I believe there's so many people in Asia who have access to that. I've gotten to know Jason through EHF, the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, which I co-founded and I was leading until early this year. And one of the things that really stood out about Jason to me is just, one, he makes a lot of time for founders and has been very generous with his advice and sharing perspectives. He's a philanthropist and loves giving, which is very refreshing to see in this space. A lot of philanthropy is really not actually founded around giving, but other forms of control. And Jason just challenges a lot of norms and assumptions of what it means to build a startup. So we'll cover a lot of those things. But Jason, super pumped to have you here. Thanks for the time.
Great to be here. I know
it's super late for you where you're at in
Not yet.
California.
It will be eventually.
Yeah. So Jason, we'd love just to start off a little bit about the genesis of 37 Signals in Basecamp. And if you can just share a little bit of that story and where are you guys today and where do you want to see the future being?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. Always fun to talk with you and share as much as I can. So I started the business with two other co-founders back in 1999. We started out as a web design company. And we were just doing website redesigns, basically, for companies that already had websites for the most part, and just trying to make them a little bit better. And we launched with a bit of an attitude. So our original website, if you want to go find it, it's 37signals.com/manifesto. Maybe someone could throw the link in the chat or something. And it was a black and white site with just text, which is an odd thing for a website design company to do. But what we wanted to do was separate ourselves from the pack and share and lead with ideas and not just with work. Everyone else leads with their work. We wanted to lead with ideas. And so we did that and kind of made a name for ourselves, and we're doing pretty well. We started getting kind of busy, and we were managing projects the way most people still do today, which is they shoot messages around, either emails or chats and phone calls and meetings, and we started losing track of stuff, and things started falling through the cracks, and I didn't know who was doing what, and we were missing deadlines, and it was kind of a mess. So we decided to build something internally to manage these projects, and we started using that with our clients, and some of our clients are like, what is this thing you're using? Like, we have projects too. Is there something for us here? Can we use this? And we go, well, we just made it for ourselves. But eventually enough people asked about it that the light bulb goes on over your head, and you go, we have an idea. Maybe there's a product here. And so we kind of finished it up and tweaked it to make it more of a public product and not just an internal thing, put some prices on it. And that was 2004. And about a year and a half later, it was doing more business for us than our website design business. So we stopped doing website design. I've been doing software ever since. We've launched a bunch of different products since. But our two main products today are Basecamp and then hey.com, which you referred to. And those are the things we're all in on at the moment. I'm skipping over a zillion things, but briefly, like, we've always worked remotely. We wrote a book on this. We work about 40 hours a week. So we're not, into 60, 70, 80-hour weeks like a lot of our industry is. We're self-funded. So we're a bootstrap company. All of our money comes from customer revenues. We work 4-day weeks in the summer months. So May through October, that would be our summer, is 4-day weeks. And that's 32-hour weeks. So we don't pack more time into fewer days. We just take some time off. We give people very generous salaries. We offer sabbaticals to everybody after 3 years, and a bunch of different things we've done over the years that's quite a bit different from the industry. And the last thing I'll say about that is that we see we're an independent business, an independent company, and we feel like we have an obligation to exercise that independence, which is to try things people wouldn't give us permission to try, to do things other companies or a board, for example, wouldn't give us permission to do. We don't have a board. And to look at our company as an experiment and to try things and see what works. So I'll stop there because there's plenty more detail to go into if we want to.
Just hearing you talk about 40-hour weeks, that is absolute craziness if you compare that to the work culture in places like South Korea or other parts of Asia that many people listening here are in. And I guess you guys have like broken pretty much every assumption and every norm, in my view, of what it means to build a startup. And one of it is you did not raise any VC money, and you've actually been quite staunch against it. I'd just love to hear a little bit about what has been your thought process around that. And, as many founders in this call are basically kind of aiming to raise money and get to point B and C and kind of chase the dream in that way. You guys have kind of paved a whole new path for what success means.
Well, what's funny is we're boring mainstream actually on this, which is that the majority of companies in the world never raise any money. Most just have to make it work. And it's only the rare few, the extremely rare few, basically the outliers that ever raise any money. So we're actually pretty mainstream and pretty boring when it comes to this point of view. But in our industry, of course, we seem to be outliers. Although, of course, even in our industry, we're very mainstream, because if you looked at all tech companies, like all of them, and software companies, hardly any of them are even able to raise money, but they just have to exist and figure it all out. But I've been pretty much opposed to it. I'm mostly opposed to it for brand new businesses that don't have any customers yet, that don't have any revenue yet, that may not even have a product yet, just have an idea. And there's a few reasons. Number one, if you raise some money, first of all, if you're even able to, you're going to get a pretty raw deal because you have no leverage. You have nothing. And that's a bad place to enter into a relationship with absolutely no leverage, and essentially begging for money from extremely rich people who are really smart, financially very, very savvy. You're just probably not going to get a good deal to begin with. And there's that. There's also the more practical side of it, which is what kind of habits do you want to form? And one of the problems with raising money early on is what you get good at is spending money. When you have money, you have to spend it. And VCs want you to spend the money. They don't want you to hold the money. They want you to spend the money. so you can spend it all, and then they can give you more, and they can take more and more of your company every time they do that. That's kind of how that works. But the habits, the things you do repeatedly are the habits that you form. And if you have to get really good at spending money, and that's what you get good at, I think you're better off as an entrepreneur having to scrap through and figure out how to make money, not how to spend it, but how to make it, how to earn it. And I think that the earlier you get on that bandwagon, the better off you're going to be. Just like if you start to learn how to play guitar when you're 5, you're going to be incredibly good at 15, just because you are. And if you have to learn how to make money early on in your entrepreneurial days, you're going to be a better entrepreneur. You're going to build better businesses eventually as you get better and better at that. And those skills are going to pay off versus just getting good at spending money, which is not really a skill. It's just something you can do. So anyway, that's some of it. That's some of it. Actually, let me add one more thing. Actually,
sure.
Another thing is that when you raise money, you're no longer on your own schedule. You're on someone else's schedule. Like, you don't get to make a lot of the calls that you might want to make. You don't get to do a lot of the things you want to do. And you have to do things now to provide a specific return versus to build a great product or to build a great business. You actually are all in it there for the return. And of course, to get a good return, you have to build a good business. But I think you should build a good business. That should be the driver, not the return.
Yeah.
And so I think the priorities are a bit out of whack when you raise a bunch of money up front.
Yeah, I mean, you point to a lot of potential misalignments that can happen in that structure. And I see so many founders kind of raising too much too early, giving up too much control, and then they're kind of stuck in a rat race, and then they kind of leave after a certain period of time, and then the organization kind of struggles as a result of it. So, I mean, it's incredible just to see you being with the same company for 21, 22 years. Which is quite rare in this space.
Yeah. It is weird. It is weird. But, one of the nice things about sticking with something is you really get to know it. So we really know the work that we know the product, we know the market, we know our customers, we know ourselves, we know each other. And, it's like a band that sticks together for a long time. They just play well together. They know how to, they get a certain sound. They can improvise with each other better. They can communicate better. There's something about that in teams and companies that stick around for a long time when there's a good, strong core of people who've been around for a long time is that there's less need to explain everything to each other. And there's just more opportunity to move forward because everyone understands each other. So there's some of that happens when you do it for a long time. I also just think, like, I admire companies and I admire products that have been around for a long time. Like, I like things like Leica as a brand, the camera company. They just make great stuff, and their stuff's just like really good. And they've been around for a long time, and they have a clear design code, and they'll also service any camera they've ever made. They're going to stick by all the things they've made. If you buy something from them, they'll be around in the future to service it. I think these are important things, especially in a very disposable world that we live in right now. And tech is extremely disposable, even software. Software comes and goes. Like, if you are putting your business online with a vendor, you want to know that vendor is going to be around. You want to know that vendor is going to be there in 3 years, so you don't lose everything and have to try something new. So we think longevity is a really important marketing tool for us as well.
I'd love to talk more about the product side, because that's something you guys have just been incredible at. But just to close the loop on the raising capital side, I guess what I'm hearing from you is, don't spend money you don't have. Earlier on, focus on actually building good revenue base, maintain that independence. And for people who are going down the path of raising capital from VCs or others, I mean, what advice would you have for them from the luxury that you have enjoyed, having designed your venture in that way, that might be applicable to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, you need some money to do something.
Yeah.
So, what we did was we used our consulting business to essentially fund our software development. So this might be a matter of, like, if you feel like you need money, maybe you do something else for a while and start the business on the side, or you scrap something together and do something on the side until that thing that you're doing on the side has enough momentum. I think that's just another way to approach it versus like just saying like there's no other way to do this but to get other people's money. I think there's other ways to do that. I just think that ask yourself why are you raising money? Is this because you think that's what you're supposed to do? Is this because you think that's what you need to do? Is it because you have ambitions and you think the only way to become XYZ size company is to raise a bunch of money? Like, why are you doing it? And you might find that you know exactly why you're doing it, but you also may find that you don't actually know why. You just think that's what you're supposed to do. And I'd be very careful about that because this is like the most fundamental thing you're going to decide. If you take money, your business will be different. There will be many things that will actually be harder to do, not easier, harder to do. Expectations will be raised. Timeframes will be shrunk or squeezed. The things you might want to do, you may not be allowed to do. You're going to have to perform for someone else. You're going to have to sell or get some liquidity at some point that you may not want down the road. A lot of decisions will be shut off. A lot of opportunities will be shut off because you're going down a very, very specific path. And unless you get to a certain size, you're going to be seen as it's not working out. Meanwhile, if you're self-funded or maybe you raise a little bit of friends and family money or something, you have more options. And I think optionality is a good thing. You could become big. You could also stay small. You could grow slower. You could take 15, 20 years to get somewhere. You can become a mid-sized company and be successful and profitable instead of being looked at as like not big enough and therefore a failure in the VC model. So I just like options. I like, when you get to call your own shots and you get to be on your own time frame and you get to do what makes sense for you, and taking money actually eliminates a lot of those options.
One of my favorite lines from an article you wrote a few years ago is talking about the valuation of Basecamp. And I think what you said is, I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah.
It's like, how many people can actually say that, and actually do that without really caring about what value the world puts on, financial value, the world puts on your company. Yeah.
I mean, again, like it's funny because pretty much every business, we're like pretty much every business. The pizza shop in the corner has no idea what they're worth. They're just like trying to survive. And the local grocery store, the local butcher, the local, a body shop, auto repair place, and they're just businesses. And they're just trying to make more money than they spend. They're trying to pay their salaries, pay their employees. The owner's trying to take home some money, and they're trying to stay afloat. And to me, that's the part that's the important part, not like what some industry thinks you're worth, what your multiple is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter day to day. And I don't want to be spending my time thinking about things that just are kind of vanity metrics in many ways. It may matter at the point where maybe you're going to sell the business. Of course, then you get a valuation or whatever. But like to think about it daily or to wonder if it's up or down, it's distracting. It'd be like looking at the stock price of the stock every single day. It's like, that's not, unless you're a day trader, that's probably not a good way to invest. It's just not the right way to do it probably. So that's what I think about when it comes to valuation. I don't know. I don't care. When I have to know and when I have to care, I'll find out. Until then, I'm focused on the product, our employees, our customers, the market, the things we want to do. Those are the things that really matter day to day.
Yeah. And one common reason for raising that I hear from a lot of founders is we need money to grow. And when you kind of ask the question, why do you actually need to grow? It's not saying growing is bad or good. It's just really understanding the reason why. It kind of takes me back to a conversation you and I had just before Hey.com launched. And I think we were walking through the demo of the product, and there was a bit of skepticism inside of me saying, how will this compete with a Gmail? And I really clearly remember your response, which was, we're not trying to be the biggest email in the world. We're just trying to be like a good product for people to use. And if 10,000, 100,000 only people use it, we're happy. We're making them happy. We're adding something really valuable to them. Yeah. I think there's just some, beautiful magic in that way of thinking.
Well, a big part of it too is we have our own economics. So we know what our costs are. We know how many people we have. We know what our monthly burn is or whatever. And so we just need to build something that makes more than that.
Yeah.
So I don't need to displace Google to be successful. Gmail there's a billion people using Gmail. Great. I will never have a billion customers or users. I don't need it, don't want it. Like if we have 40,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 paying customers, we're in an exceptional position for us in our economics, in our business model, in our costs and all that stuff. So, I find a lot of entrepreneurs are always worried about like other people's economics. All you've got to do is figure out what you need to cover your expenses and make sure you cover those. So if you have 12 people and you need to make I'm making up numbers, $180,000 a month US or whatever to like cover that and cover your rent or whatever you're covering and take home your own salary, that's all you need. You don't need to go like, well, this other company is so much bigger than us. Well, it doesn't matter what they are. Yeah. It has unless like it's really a zero-sum game, but very few markets truly are that. There are some, we can find some examples of that, but like very, 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 very few are. And most that people are actually in are not, for sure. So you just got to find out what covers you, what makes you the money and the profits and the whatever you need. And that's what matters. So in that case, like we have close to, I think, 40,000 paying customers, which is like, it wouldn't make sense for Google to make a product that only has 40,000 paying customers. But for us with 50 employees, it makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So that's what matters. That's our reality. And that's what everyone needs to figure out what their own reality is and not worry about what other company's reality is.
So you used your size to your advantage to build products you love creating and have a work-life balance that makes a lot more sense to you.
Yeah, and think about this. Like, think about all of the things we can do that Google could not, for example.
Totally.
The only thing Google can do is like anything that's a massive, massive success or massive hit or has an enormous customer base. Otherwise, it's just not interesting to them. And that actually is quite limiting compared to what we could do, which is, if we only need a few 10,000 customers to make something work, like there's a lot of options. There's a lot of groups in the world, 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 person groups or interest groups or customers that we can build for. So we have a lot more options, I think, actually. And that's how I like to look at it, at least. Yeah.
So before we move on to the future of work side, just around products, and you guys have built different types of products over time and have decided to sunset some. When you're building a product, how do you go about making decisions? How do you approach the concepts of roadmaps and KPIs and sort of organizing teams around, shipping things out to the world? 'Cause you guys have kind of like pushed a bunch of boundaries and experimented a lot in that space.
Yeah, so our current methodology is something we called Shape Up, which is at basecamp.com/shapeup. I don't know if I can drop that in a chat, but someone can type it up. It's a very specific sort of approach where we work 6 weeks at a time. We call them 6-week cycles. And we decide what we're going to do every 6 weeks. So we don't have a long roadmap. Literally, I don't know what we're going to do. I know what we're doing now. We just started a new cycle last week. So I know what the next 6 weeks are going to look like. I have zero idea what the week 7 from now is going to look like. I don't know. Once we're done with these 6 weeks, we sort of take a 2-week gap, tighten some things up in the company, and then we come up with what we're going to do for the next 6 weeks. And so we do this 6 weeks at a time. And it allows us to ship a lot of stuff in a short period of time. It forces us to really focus on what matters in a particular feature and really understand who we're building it for and why we're building it. And we typically work with teams of 2 people, 1 programmer, 1 designer works on a feature. Features can be up to 6 weeks long or can be a couple days or a few weeks, depending on like how big or small the feature is. And we have a number of product teams, again, 2 people each, working on different things at once. And I'm skipping over a million details, but that's how we do it. So we don't spend like as much time as it takes. We don't spend months. We don't do 2-week agile sprints on things that actually are a 1-year project, but 2 weeks at a time. We don't do that. Nothing we do is allowed to take more than 6 weeks from start to finish. Now, a whole product is a collection of 6-week features, but no individual feature we build usually, there's a few exceptions, maybe 1 or 2 a year, take more than 6 weeks at a time. And we just keep working that way, and it's a wonderful way to continue to to figure out what we need to do as we go versus imagining that we know everything we're going to need to do over the next year or 2 or 3. So I'm very much against roadmaps. I'm very much against long-term projects. I'm very much against things that never ship or piling more people into something to get it done faster. I don't think many of those things actually work.
Makes a lot of sense because, it aligns with how you guys have structured the whole organization and work. And I guess one of the things from what you're describing is, as I've thought more about it, sometimes it might be harder just to pick only one aspect without fully kind of designing how you work. So, for everyone listening here, if you really want to know, just go online and read up a lot more about, how Basecamp works, just so they can understand all the different facets of this. But just kind of want to jump into the fact that you guys have been doing remote work for a long time. And what was it that inspired you to design Basecamp as a remote work organization?
It was an accident, really. It wasn't it wasn't really a desire. So my first 2 partners were local. So we were based in Chicago at the time. And then actually the first 2 partners and first employee were all in Chicago. But then the next person we hired was in Denmark, who happened to be my future business partner, David Hannemeyer Hansen. He was in Denmark. And he was, I think, 7 time zones ahead, or 6 or 7. And you know what? We just didn't even think it wouldn't work. Didn't even enter our mind that this wouldn't work. We just worked remotely together across time zones, and it worked wonderfully. And we didn't at that point decide only to hire remotely or anything like that. We're just that worked out well. Let's go find another programmer. And David's I know a guy named Jameis Buck who lives in Utah. He's on the Rails team, core Rails team. Why don't we hire him? We go, okay, let's hire him. And then that worked out well. And we just kind of kept hiring whoever we could find who was the best person we could find. Didn't matter where they lived. And eventually we just kept doing some of that. We hired some people in Chicago. We hired people all over the world. And it wasn't ever a conscious effort to become a remote organization. I think what's important, though, is that if you are going to have remote workers, you want to make sure you have more remote workers than local workers. Otherwise, you end up having a local culture and then a few people who are remote. And that's a hard thing. So you always, if you do have remote, you want to favor remote and not favor local. I think that's kind of the really most important little cue there.
Yeah. How did that influence the types of products you built?
It probably influenced the way in which we build them. Basecamp was a collaborative tool that we built to work with clients who are almost always remote also. Clients don't work in the same office that you work in typically. But I think it more influenced the way we work, which is rapidly trying to figure out the simplest possible version of something to do. Also, we had very few people. Also, the first version of Basecamp we built, David was just a student at Copenhagen Business School. And he was a contractor, and I bought 10 hours a week from him. And that's all the time he had. And so we just got really used to just figuring out how to be extremely efficient and figure out exactly what needed to be done. What's the simplest possible version of this? What's what we call the epicenter of the idea? And let's just do that. And I think we just practice that. And also when you're not physically with each other, you tend to waste less time on things that probably don't matter so much, or you don't overthink as much. I think when you're local, it's easy to pull someone into a room and sort of overthink everything and spend almost too much time pre-planning and pre-discussing. Yeah. So we just our main way of communicating was to build, to build the thing and talk about the actual thing we're building and look at the actual thing, on a screen share at the time. And discuss something real versus discussing what's on the whiteboard, which is really easy to do in a physical space.
Yes.
In a virtual space, it's actually quite hard. You can make decks and all that stuff. We've never done that. We just look at the work. So we got to build something to look at it. And that just became part of how we worked. And it was a benefit of being remote. Also, the other thing that was nice is that we only had a few hours overlap during the day, which gave each of us 3, 4, 5 hours of like focused work time where there were no distractions, and then a few hours of overlap where we can kind of catch up with each other and discuss things. Versus having like, if everyone's local, everyone has the same schedule roughly, and you have a lot more overlap, which sounds good, but actually is actually quite distracting. So it's nice for like when I'm working, like this is true. David's back in Denmark right now. So, I don't know what time it is for him, but I'll go to sleep soon. He'll be working for 4 or 5 hours. I'll get up, I'll see what he did. We'll catch up in the morning over a couple hours. He'll go to sleep, I'll work. And that cycle is actually a really healthy cycle. So that's something you can do when you work remotely, especially across time zones. Anyway, it just made us really efficient and thoughtful, I think, to work with.
I guess what I'm hearing from you is it kind of touches back on your lens around meetings as well. Is you're not getting together to talk about work. You're actually getting together to do the work, which is where a lot of companies find themselves in. You spend so much time talking about work.
Yes.
As opposed to doing it.
We do meet, but the meetings are always around reviewing the product that we're making or the feature that we're making. And the meeting, I'm saying it in quotes here, is like 2 or 3 people. And it's not a meeting. Like there's not an agenda. It's more like, where are we at? Let's look at this. Let's riff on this. Let's talk about this. How does it feel? It's a conversation about something that we've built, that we're building. Versus like getting together to talk about something that we're going to do. We just almost never get together to talk about something we're going to do. We always talk about something we've done and what we are currently doing. And that's a very different, I think, approach to getting people together. And so we do have video chats occasionally, time to time, but it's usually kind of an exception to the rule versus except when there's like sometimes we'll do like once a week. The design team will just have a call for an hour just to hang out. The programmer, the product team will have a team call. So we'll have some of those things that are just more social moments. But when we get specific, it's always about something we've already done or are doing. Yeah.
And so if we kind of zoom out a little bit now, and COVID has kind of forced us to not move, and so try to figure out how to collaborate and work, and I actually don't like the term future of work. It's like, how do we better coordinate and collaborate, as a human species on things that matter to us? Like, how are you seeing the trends from your side in terms of just where are we headed and how we collaborate? I mean, Basecamp has been building tools for better collaboration and teamwork. But also from where you said, the world is just catching up to what you've been doing. And it's just scratching the surface even of what's really possible in full greater collaboration. So yeah, what do you see as a society we're heading at, and what are opportunities for people to work on in this space?
I'm not much of like a futurist or prediction person. I can only tell you what I think is not good in some ways and good in others. So I think video chat is probably being overused, or video is actually being overused. In a situation like this, I think it's really good because people can watch, like you have an audience kind of thing. But when 2 or 3 people need to get together, unless they're looking at something together, like audio is actually better. And the other thing is that I think what ends up happening is sitting in front of a camera all day is very fatiguing. It's actually awkward. When people are working at home, especially, you'll be doing a video conference with someone who's like, they live in a 1-bedroom apartment and you're looking at their bed behind them. It's like kind of the whole thing's kind of weird. Yeah. And it's like, we just are talking. We don't need to actually look at each other while we're talking. We can just hop on the phone and talk. And so I think I'd like to see more audio. I think audio is actually a better medium for conversation than video is. Actually, video is trying to replicate what it was like to be in person. But if you don't have to be in person, you don't have to simulate being in person. And that's why I think audio is actually really kind of a secret weapon here, even though it's like the oldest form of communication in a sense. I think it's really a better approach. I think taking time zones into account, it's very hard to work in real time across the world. because people are sleeping and have different schedules. So I'm a big fan of asynchronous work, which is writing things up in complete ideas, writing up a page or two, a complete thought, and putting it out there and letting other people get back to you when they have a chance versus trying to sync up schedules and discussing it in real time. So I'd like to see a little bit less real-time communication also, and more publishing of complete thoughts, and let people, it's weird. It's weird to like, imagine this. You yourself have thought something over for 3 days, and then you go into a chat or you go into a meeting and you say it out loud. Well, when you say something out loud in a meeting or in a chat, like the expectation is someone else has to respond to that.
Yeah.
You've thought about it for 3 days. They just heard it a second ago, and now they're expected to like do something with it. That's just a really lopsided situation. I'd rather spend time thinking about something, writing it up, and giving someone else time to think about what I wrote, and so they can think about what they think about it. And so it's having a little bit more symmetry on both sides of it, I think, is actually quite handy and healthy. So I don't know. Those are kind of my things. Like, I don't know much about AR and VR and how that would be beneficial. Like, there's actually a design studio down the street from where I am right now for Audi, the car manufacturer, and it's a concept car studio where they design concept cars, and they're doing it entirely virtually with goggles on and the whole thing. And it's very, very cool. And that's a really interesting medium for that kind of work. But I'm not so sure it's that useful for most things that are more information based. So anyway, I don't know. It's probably not very insightful, but that's just sort of what I think about these days.
Yeah. And, around the same lines, I guess where my head has been at lately is also the fact that how humans are distributed around the world, a huge part of it is very arbitrary based on where you're born. And those spaces kind of limit your individual potential as well as your potential to contribute to the world. And I don't know, as I think about remote work, as I think about better globalization, about technology, and just the global connectivity that we have, is what are better ways for human coordination? And it doesn't have to be at a centralized way, like even in small projects or even small stage companies, for people to be able to work on things that matter to them across geographic borders without being limited by, just boundaries.
It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing what's possible right now. We just hired 6 new programmers. All of them are in Europe. And it's also just like, it's exciting to work with people in different places with different perspectives and a different point of view. And that's one of the wonderful things about remote work. It's not just about like working at home in the same city as your coworkers, but actually true remote work for me is about like basically expanding horizons and being able to be anywhere and change where you are and not be stuck in a place because you have to sometimes go to an office or whatever. So I love this idea of giving people opportunities who normally couldn't get a particular type of job or work on a particular type of problem because like their local community just doesn't have those problems or doesn't have the tools that they would normally need, or there aren't the kinds of jobs that someone else might want to do where they live. So it offers up such an opportunity for employers and employees. And I think that's just such a great thing. I mean, it creates more competition in the job market, which is also great for everybody. Actually, it's good for companies too, even though it always seems bad for companies in some ways. It's good for companies. It's good for companies. They have to differentiate themselves and figure out why they're worth working at, those kinds of things. So anyway, I think it's really all good stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Hey, everybody, just letting you know, you can put your questions in the Q&A side, and we're going to move to that very shortly. But before we do that, Jason, here we've got groups of founders. Some of them are first-time entrepreneurs. Some of them have built companies before. What advice and perspective would you have for people who are trying to do something good for the world and doing it through businesses that are being built today?
So more like altruistic capitalism or something, you mean? Or what do you...
No, just, people who are trying to contribute through their products and services to meaningful problems around the world. many who are learning the ropes of what it means to be an entrepreneur, how to what it means to be building great products that other people will use at some point.
Yeah.
You've been at this for decades. So what nuggets of wisdom would you have?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to work on a problem or a product or whatever that you actually care about. Because the truth is business is mostly mundane and boring. Like, it's not, building products and running companies is not actually exciting most of the time. It's really hard. It's really frustrating. It's a lot of mundane work that's boring and not interesting. And you've got to really be interested in the subject matter itself, I think, in order to maintain your interest over a long period of time, or have a problem that this thing that you're building is going to solve, along with solving it for many other people as well. So I've always just advocated, finding something that, you can scratch your own itch with. What is something that you need, that you think the world could use also, but that you really need? And you'll be a really good judge of the quality of that thing and whether or not it's solving the problem or scratching the itch because it's yours, that you actually have. You don't have to solve someone else's problem, even though you are also, but you're solving yours first, and recognizing there's a lot of people in the world that are probably just like you and have similar needs or find themselves in similar scenarios. So, but I think business, it only gets harder. It's full of boring stuff. It's not exciting most of the time. There are incredibly exciting moments. There's an amazing feeling of building something with other people. There's an amazing thing of releasing it to customers and getting it out in the world. All those things are amazing, but those actually you don't release new products all the time. Most of the time you release a product, then you maintain it for a long time. You release new features, but that major rush of getting something out and launched is a very short-term feeling. You've got to really be motivated by continuing to iterate and improve the thing that you've built versus just getting excited about launching things. Because that's actually the easy part. The hard part and the common part is maintaining the thing and staying in business and building a business model that's sustainable and all those things. That's what most of the work actually is.
I'm into that. So on that note, I'm going to pull out some questions people have here. And
sure.
One, Nikon asked, what have been your biggest lessons in 2021?
Oh, it's a really cool platform. I've never used this before. I like how you can kind of throw the question on the stage like that. The big thing I'm taking away from 2021 is actually to question fundamental assumptions. So we are actually changing our business in a big way this year. So historically, we've always been trying to keep our company as small as possible. Not in terms of customers or revenue or profits, but in terms of employees. We just want to keep the company as small as we can. And we got a bit smaller this year, which I can talk about. I saw there was a question about that earlier. But what we decided was that we want to lift the limits that we've placed on ourselves and see what we're actually capable of if we go all in for a while. So historically, we've only been able to work on one product at a time. We'd work on Basecamp for a while. We put that aside. We work on Hey for a while. We put that aside. We work back on Basecamp. We want to be able to run two products at once at full speed, and maybe a third, and maybe some other stuff, and actually have some slack in the system too, so we don't have everyone fully occupied. We've always been running extremely lean and extremely efficiently, 100% efficiency, which is not really a healthy place to be, actually. So one of the things we're doing this year is we're actually going to grow. Over the next couple of years, we're looking to double the size of our company, get to 100, 120 people, maybe perhaps more than that if we need to. Be able to work on two products at once, maybe work on a third product as well, and just kind of challenge some of the core assumptions that we've always held and actually see what we're capable of. So 2021 is really about the next 10 years for us, I think, more so than this specific year, but it's about shedding a little bit and figuring out where we want to go from here and kind of a renewed ambition. And so, 22 years in is as good a time as ever to try that.
Yeah. Awesome. Another question, there is one around, I think there's power in small chats. Some great ideas can emerge from unplanned random conversations. Working remotely doesn't easily facilitate such conversations. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it can. And And I also think that spontaneity and brainstorming and riffing is often like overrated, in that you actually have to implement the things that you come up with. So this idea that you're always kind of coming up with new stuff and just more spontaneous conversations will lead to more stuff. Like at some point you got to do the stuff. And so you got to actually get down to work. And so I don't actually think you want this overflowing fountain of new ideas all the time. Actually, you got to kind of get in and pick one and work on it. But we, like as I was saying earlier, we do team chats every week. Different teams get together for about an hour on Zoom and catch up. Small teams will work together on things when they're actually doing the work. And there's all sorts of opportunity for conversation to happen and for spontaneity to happen in those settings. So, I don't think remote makes it makes it a little bit harder, but it certainly doesn't make it anywhere near impossible. It's just you have to be a little bit more deliberate about it, perhaps, than you might be if, for example, you were sitting down at lunch with a group of people where you can just kind of riff because you're eating lunch. You don't eat lunch remotely. So that's one of those things where you don't have that moment of spontaneity. But as far as like planned random conversations, you can actually have as many of those as you'd still like. I'd still would suggest, though, getting down to work, getting down to business, figuring something out that you want to do and work on that, not just keep changing your mind all the time about the things you want to do. I know that's not what this question was really about, but I do see that, especially with new companies. There's just almost too much of a turnover of ideas. And there's not enough progress made on anything that's real. And I think it's just important to pick something and go with it. And you can iterate while you're doing it, but this moment of like grand new ideas bubbling up all the time, I don't think it's actually a healthy degree of brainstorming.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will move on to some questions here. What's the common mistake companies or teams make when they shift to remote work?
This is a great question. I think the biggest mistake, or most common mistake, is they just work the same way they worked before, but now just remotely. So if they had meetings all day long, they now just have meetings all day long remotely. Remote work is actually a different way to work. It's not just a distributed way to work. So the opportunities are more asynchronous work, more focused time where there are fewer distractions, not more distractions. What ends up happening a lot of the times with remote work is that there's more distractions because people take their patterns that they used in person and extend them online where they're worse. Like it's harder to sit in meetings all day when you're looking at a little tiny camera on your laptop. It's harder to not be distracted when you're getting constant pings and notifications for all these chat things going on all the time. These things are harder remotely. And so I think the most important thing is to move back, slow it down, write things up in long form, have more asynchronous communication, more sort of focused flow time, and not just work like you did in person, but actually use this opportunity to work a bit differently. Think about it almost as a different platform. And the way I've been thinking about it is this. If you think about like software that's been ported from like Windows to Mac, you can tell that it wasn't created natively in an environment. It was pulled from something else. You're like, this doesn't feel like a Mac program. This doesn't feel right. That's what's happening with remote work. You're porting local work into the remote sphere. And it just doesn't work as well. You want to be like, what's native to remote? You want to think about what's native to remote. What are the opportunities that remote provides? And that's space, freedom, autonomy, quiet time, less distractions, and lean into those things versus trying to bring the physical world into the remote world.
Yeah, that's something we try to do in our team at EHF, and you got to change the way you work completely.
Yeah,
it's a common mistake. Yeah,
it's by the way, it's also something that was very common during COVID because companies were slammed into remote work without any time to think about it. Like all of a sudden, it's like, here we are. And so I understand how hard it was, and companies just kind of deferred or fell back on their their patterns and what they knew. So I get that. But now we have an opportunity, 2 years into this, hopefully, for companies to rethink a little bit about what's worked and what hasn't worked and where to go from here. And I think that's the real opportunity, is to figure out what's native about remote working and go for that.
Yeah. Awesome. There's a question from one of our teams, actually, JT here. What are your thoughts on blended finance in new fundraising schemes such as crowdfunding?
I like this. I've been a big fan of Kickstarter for a long time and things like this, because you're not giving up equity. There are the expectations actually that you deliver a product, which is something I really liked specifically about Kickstarter, that like customers are funding you and they expect something in return, like that thing that they expect in return is the thing that you're making, which is different than expecting money in return, which is not the thing that you're making. Money is what comes from the thing that you make. I like the alignment between, like, people are giving you something up front. They're basically placing pre-orders in this case, and you have to deliver a product. It's like such great motivation to get to work and make the thing that you promise people. So I like that a lot. I also like the opportunity for smaller investors to get involved and to play a part. I think, though, you need to think a little bit about, like, what does it mean? What does it mean if you have 1,000 people who funded your company? Like, what does that really look like? Who are you beholden to? How does that work? How does voting work? If there is voting, if not, but I love this idea of crowdfunding and not just raising a whole bunch of money to make more money, but actually to raise money to build something for other people who are giving you money. I think that's a really good alignment of incentives. Yeah,
we're seeing. I know we've spoken a little bit about it, Jason, as well. A lot of people are leveraging decentralized technologies and blockchain to also just experiment with completely new ways of fundraising for their projects, selling their tokens to their followers. Legislation is still kind of gray area for many people, but there's a lot of experiments being played around that space as well, which is changing the traditional power dynamic of VC startup form that we currently see right now.
Yes. Hang on, I'm just responding to somebody in the chat who asked me something. I'm just going to have them email me again. Yeah, I think that's really, really super interesting. I think the other thing that's really neat is just this idea. There's a handful of these new. They're not really VCs so much, but they're independent. I don't even know what they're really called, but Tiny VC, Indie VC was one before. Earnest Capital. There are these investment groups that will give you enough money to cover your salary for a year, basically, so you can go full time on something. Like, maybe it's for people who are kind of, they already have a day job, but they've got this business and there's something there. There's definitely something there, but they just don't have enough time. And if they just had a full time, if it was just full time, they could take it somewhere. And so they might give you, like, $100,000 or something. And it might be a convertible note, or it might be a tiny bit of equity or something like that. But it's not a big, you don't need millions. You need, like, just enough to work for a year on a thing. And that I really like a lot, compared to the traditional VC route, which is like, give a big chunk of your company away for too much money that you don't need. So I'd love to see more of that. Yeah.
And are they taking equity in the business when they do that, or how do they navigate that model you just spoke about right now?
There's different models. Some take equity, but it's very small. Others, it's more like a convertible note that if it works out, then they, I think if it gets past that first round of funding, I think then they begin to earn some, either a dividend on it or something else. Each model is a little bit different, but like Earnest Capital, Tiny Capital, I think is the other one. Indie VC, which closed down recently, but was the pioneer in this field, talked a lot about this. There's different models here, but the point is it's a small amount of capital. And also, I think Indie VC allowed their founders to buy Indie VC out early if they wanted their whole company back or something like that. So it's just more flexible. It's just interesting. I think it's a really smart additional model that's bubbling up.
Yeah. There's a couple of friends also that set up a fund that buys out VCs that you want to get rid of.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
And sells it back to you over a period of time. So you take back the ownership as
cool.
Well.
Yeah, that's cool.
Set up as an impact fund. Yeah.
I love that, actually. That's a really neat idea. And now I'm thinking more about this. I think these other companies too, what they'll do is their aim is to actually not have exits necessarily, but to build profitable businesses that throw off cash. And so they would get, dividends on an annual basis. And if you're picking up, 3 or 4% of a company and you have 50 companies that are throwing off lots of money doing that, it's a really good return actually for the fund. So there's just different ways to do it. Like to actually the incentive is to stay in business and to generate profits and to distribute money through profits versus liquidity event sort of situations. But I like the idea of getting sort of someone who comes in and helps you buy out of bad deals perhaps, or not even bad deals, but you just change your mind. Totally. And you want your company back, that kind of thing.
Yeah. There was a recent post on Twitter that I read about Sequoia, the large VC fund. They've been around for decades. And what if they'd held on to all their positions and all the startups that they invested in without exits?
Right.
And what would be the size of the fund? I think it was in the trillions of dollars that the fund would be in. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So they're kind of trying to think about this concept of patient capital, which has been used in the impact investment landscape for quite some time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a neat experiment, and you don't even have to do a thought experiment. Like someone could literally run the numbers on that and see. Yeah, of course, the challenge there, of course, is that those funds, their limited partners want returns.
Exactly.
So it's hard. It's a hard problem. Yeah. It's hard. Yeah, the incentives don't line up there. But anyway, it's neat to think about.
Yeah. Here's one interesting question here. I think there are trade-offs between having thoughtful, asynchronous conversations and speed. How do you guys approach those trade-offs?
Well, I think speed, again, is this overrated thing where everyone's trying to have quick conversations. We're incredibly fast. We ship tons of work in 6 weeks. Most companies take months and months and months and months to ship the kind of stuff we ship in 6 weeks. So we're actually incredibly fast, even though we talk slow. So how is that? Well, we give the teams all the autonomy they need to make the decisions they need to make. They don't need to get permission to do certain things. Their job is to actually scope things down and scale stuff back so they can ship more in shorter periods of time. And so we're very much focused on making decisions and moving forward and managing scope and not getting caught up in things that last forever. And we move very, very fast, even though we talk slow. So I think this idea of rapid conversation is misleading, as if you're moving fast that way. Often you're not actually getting anywhere. You're just talking a lot and you're talking one line at a time. So you're not actually able to communicate an entire thought and other people jump in and you're having a lot of fast conversation, but you're actually moving slowly because of it, or you're moving incorrectly, or there's misunderstanding or misinterpretations of what was said because it wasn't a complete thought. So I don't think there's anything slow actually about being clear and being complete, and then setting tight scopes and tight timeframes and setting your appetites, which is what we call them, and just getting down to work and delivering things and giving teams a lot of autonomy and power to build what they need to build their own way. And anyway, we're quick. We're very, very quick.
Yeah. And it takes time to be thoughtful. Like for me, it takes me time to process new information. And so it's the more space you give people to actually come up with thoughtful things, the better the outcome.
Yeah, what we try to do is I want to try to eliminate reactions internally and instead make sure people have time to write responses. A response is a very different thing from a reaction. Reactions are like, well, someone says something, I got to say something, because in the medium we're working with, it's fast. So I got to react. I got to say it. What if I don't say anything? It's like, are they going to wonder if I'm there? Or it's like, just no. Take the time to think and respond. And that short conversation, which may actually happen over a day, is actually ultimately faster because you don't have to back up and repeat yourself again. You don't have to go down the wrong path and go, oh, that's not what you meant? Oh, yeah, I thought, let me go back in the transcript and thought, oh, that wasn't what you meant? Oh, I missed that other thing that was 2 days before that was, it's like, no. Everything, the entire conversation is thoughtful, is long form, and it's all there in one place, and you know the whole thing from top to bottom. it's just a more efficient way to communicate. I'm going to get this wrong. What is this? You've heard this saying. I think it's been attributed, I think, to the U.S. Marines, but I don't actually know who. It's like smooth. All right, hang on. I'm going to look it up because I'm going to get this wrong. Hang on. The quote is slow. Let's say, hang on. Let me see what the actual quote is here. Hang on. What is the quote? I think it's slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yes.
It's sort of the quote. And that's how we try to be. We try to be slow, deliberate, smooth, and clear. And then we can actually move quite fast when we don't have to repeat ourselves and people don't have to wonder what someone meant and where that latest communication is. And someone wasn't around when people were talking, and so they weren't part of the conversation. They have to come back in later. They change their mind, the whole thing. So anyway, I'm beating a dead horse here, but that's basically how we do it. Yeah.
We had that line in our gym.
Okay.
CrossFit gym, which makes a lot of sense in so many other contexts.
Yeah.
There's a question about one of the recent changes Basecamp made about, I don't know if it's worded right, but basically, would you self-reflect about no political discussions at work issue? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so back in April, we decided that after a few years of sort of a slow boil of discontent and, I don't know, sort of a non-conducive environment to do the work we want to do and trust each other, we decided that we were going to separate work and politics. In the U.S., this is more of a U.S. thing, although it's a world thing too, but in the U.S., things have become extremely tribal. It's either this side or that side, and this side is right and this side is wrong, or this side is right and this side is wrong, and if you're not on my side, you're evil, and how could you? And it's like, it's a very, very heated environment in the United States right now, and has been since for quite a while, but starting around 2015, 16. It was getting in the way of actually just communicating with each other in a trust in a way where people were still given the benefit of the doubt, and people became distant and tribal, and it wasn't a good thing. So anyway, long story short is we decided that we were going to separate work and politics, that we were not going to have political discussions in the same venue where we work. So we use Basecamp to do work. If you want to talk with your colleagues about politics, set up a Signal group, WhatsApp group, another Basecamp account, Slack, Discord, whatever you want. But we're not going to mix political activism and discussions in with the work itself. And this was very controversial. Ultimately, about 20 people quit over it, which was a big portion of the company, about 30%. It kind of blew up in social media and the media and the press and the whole thing. And it was a very interesting thing. It was I expected it to be controversial, but not quite this controversial. I didn't expect so many people to leave the company, but I still think it was the right decision. And I think we could have messaged it differently. We could have rolled it out differently. We should have given more people time to think about it internally before we talked about it publicly. There's a bunch of lessons learned there, but I'm still very comfortable with the decision. And actually, we're in a significantly better place today. The company today is a better company than it was when we were having these kinds of discussions. And we're growing again, and we're excited again, and we're getting ambitious again. And I'm really comfortable with where we're at now. And I was not very comfortable with where we were before. But it was a very controversial decision. And I would only say to every company owner that you've got to want to work at the company that you run. And there was a point in time where I didn't really want to work at my own company because the conversations that we're having and the trust that was lost was just not comfortable, not a good place for us to be. And so we made some decisions, and that's that. I don't know what else to say about it, but every company has to make up their own mind on this.
I guess a broader lens around that is it's kind of like inherent with the nature of remote work or even global work, because that inherently brings diverse perspectives and ways of thinking. And, traditionally it's easier to aim an organization towards sort of sameness in way of seeing the world. And the more remote you work and the more diverse, it's sort of in the literal sense of diverse, the more diverse you become, then the easier it becomes to create different forms of worldview conflicts, especially when we bring our life stuff to the work stuff. If we see work as kind of the solution for everything, then it's kind of not set up for success.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's also interesting to me because in different cultures have different points of view on this. But when we did this, I heard from a lot of people in Europe who were shocked that anyone even talked politics at work. It's like, that's just not what we do in Germany. We don't talk politics at work. Like, that's just not, work is for work and religion is for religion and work is, and politics is for politics. Like, just like in the US, it'd be extremely awkward for people to be proselytizing religion at work and trying to convert people to this way of thinking, or to shame someone for this way of thinking. Like, that would be, everyone would be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And politics has become religious in the United States. And we just feel like if we're not going to talk politics, we're not going to talk religion, we probably shouldn't be talking politics. And that was the decision. But it is very cultural, because it's very interesting. It was mostly an American thing for our employees. Most of the people who left were American. And we have a number of employees from other countries around the world. And they were kind of really surprised and taken aback by it, because in their cultures, you just really don't, it's just not something that's discussed at work, and people don't want to talk about it at work. So anyway, it's a very complicated issue. It was sad. It was a very sad time. Lost a number of employees who'd been with us for 10, 12, 15 years, people who I considered dear friends. And it was really hard. It was really, really hard, but I still feel like we made the right decision for us. And this is getting back to something I said earlier, which is that we look at our company as an experiment. We do things to try new things. Not everything's going to work out, but we were early on remote work, and now everyone's working remotely. I think we might be early on this too. I don't know. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're way out of step. It's possible as well. I'm not sure. But the whole point is that this is our organization is a place to experiment with ideas, to make decisions, and to do things that people wouldn't give us permission to do had we had to have asked someone else for permission. So that's kind of an obligation I hold as an employee. As an entrepreneur, is to try to do things that no one would give me permission to do. I want to live up to that definition of what entrepreneurship kind of is doing new things and trying new things that the world hasn't seen before, perhaps, or are potentially unpopular as well at the time.
Yeah, and just as we all think about, building companies that are global, or the more remote work becomes a thing, I think this will be an aspect that we'll have to navigate collectively, because then you're basically going to have a foot in so many different cultures, and each culture is going to go through whatever social thing that it's going through, and how do we navigate it as companies, as humans? Because those topics are very different in each country.
The other thing I would say too that was interesting about that experience, and I'm not sure it would have been much different, but I think it may have been. So historically, we've gotten together twice a year as a company, all together for a week, twice a year. We'd fly everybody into one city, and we'd hang out as human beings. We'd share meals together. We'd laugh together. We'd have some personal moments together. And everyone's gone through this too, of course. But it was kind of a shock for us, because we didn't realize how valuable it was. And we actually hadn't seen each other for about 2 years. And so I think you end up losing a bit of humanity when you just look at people through little squares, and you forget that they're human beings too, with points of view and opinions and different worldviews and different lifestyle, all these things. Like, you just kind of lose some of that. And I think that had we been together a bit more, we may have been able to get through it differently than we did. But I don't know. And that's not a luxury anyone else had too. Like, everyone's sort of been remote. So I'm not suggesting that that was the reason, but I do think it's important, even for remote companies, to get together a few times a year as best they can. Either everybody or small teams, just so there is some transfer of humanity and reminder that we're all just fleshy creatures. We're all just trying to figure this out as we go.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I'm going to move on to a question from Yuri Lee here, who typed it in 3 different notes. So it's going to be hard to bring it up here. But basically her point is that she agrees with your working method, Jason. However, the working culture in Asia is different from the Western world. And in Asia, what she's experiencing is that some CEOs and managers, they really want to stick to the old traditional ways of working, including Mr. and Mrs. and formalities and so on. And the younger generation is sort of a bigger gap that's been developed between that older generation and the younger generation. So her question is, do you know any cases or companies that have had, a conservative perspective in how she's describing it, but now have switched to implementing new ways of working? And what kinds of actions organizations can take, to move in that direction?
Yeah, really interesting question. And I have one example, which is like my favorite example of this, but there must be many, many others. But it requires, and I'll tell you what it is in a second, but it requires a change from the top. It requires management to change, which is hard. It requires new leadership. It can be a groundswell, but it can be put out. The fire can be put out pretty easily if management just doesn't want to give into this sort of thing. So the book there's a book about this, and it really inspired me to start my business and run my business the way I run it. It's a book called Maverick by a guy named Ricardo Semler, who is a Brazilian fellow who took over his father's business. I think his father died or retired. I forget what it was. This book's about 20-something years old. And he took over this business. Maybe it's over than that now, 25 years or something. Anyway, took over his business. And it was a big, old, paternalistic business. It was like this industrial, they made like industrial equipment, industrial oil pumps. So like big, huge, old school business. Very, very regimented, lots of hierarchy, very traditional. He took the business over and it made no sense to him. He's like, how can you run a business with so much structure, and why don't people have any space to think? And why do managers get to hire people? Why can't people hire their managers? And like he had all these different ideas. And so there was apparently in the book he's talking about, there's like this rule book that he inherited that was like thick. If you dropped it on the table, it would make a sound. He just threw it out. He's like, let's just do things differently around here and try some new things. He just threw out the old rules and came up with new rules. And it was really, really, really interesting in a very old traditional business. And the book is all about how it worked out. And it turns out it worked out famously, really, really well. But he talked about all the changes that he made and how he made them and who he was up against in making them. But it was important that he owned the place and was open to the change. I think that's the important part. It's going to be very, very, very difficult to budge old culture. When the old culture is held tight by managers and structure that have been there for, in some cases, maybe a generation. Just hard unless you get new leadership in, but it's possible. So read the book Maverick by Ricardo Semler. It's a hugely inspirational book, and he's a really inspirational figure, and it shows that it can be done. There, I'm sure, are many, many other examples of it, but I don't have any other offhand.
Awesome. I'll add it to my list as well.
Such a good book. It's such a good book. And he's such a great writer, and it's a wonderful story. So
amazing. And talking about decision-making, there's a question around that. What is your decision-making framework at Basecamp for taking on new projects? There's an ethos of focus on commitment to one product, but also a few related projects, Campfire, et cetera, that you've launched most recently. And someone asked a similar type of question about productivity in the shape up and who gets to decide what projects or teams will work on.
Okay. So the way it works is there's two different ways to look at this. There's like inventing a new product from scratch, and then also features within an existing product. So let's talk about features within an existing product, because we don't invent new products very often, like literally almost never. We've been around for 22 years. We have 2 products right now. So we're not inventing new products all the time. That's a different thing. But for features inside of a product, ideas come from all over the place. Other employees, customers, me, David, a whole bunch of people come up with ideas. Ideas filter up, they filter down, they filter around. And at the end of every 6-week cycle, I will typically lead the process of gathering up a bunch of different ideas, and I'll shape them up, meaning I'll think them through, I'll ask people about them, I'll jot them down, I'll write like a pitch, which is like, you probably can't, it's like a page and a half. Some sketches, a lot of writing, storytelling, that sort of thing, about things I think we should do. I'll bring these then to a small collection of usually there's 3 or 4 people, which is called the betting table, is what it is in shape up parlance. And we'll basically put these ideas not on a table because we're virtual, but we'll put them in a Basecamp project and talk about all these different ideas and riff on them back and forth and decide which ones we want to do. Sometimes it's all of them. Most frequently, it's not all of them because we don't have time to do all of them in 6 weeks. But there's a small group of people who decide, and ultimately, it's my decision because I'm the product owner. I'm in charge of Basecamp and I'm in charge of Hey. So ultimately, I will decide, but I bring counsel together to discuss these things. And then what happens is we solidify the projects, and then we assign those projects to different teams. And sometimes people have a say in the types of like we'll say, here are the 6 projects we're going to do. And some people go, I want to work on that one. Other people go, I want to work on this one. Other people are like, I don't care what I work on. Whatever you want to give me is cool. And so you kind of work that out. And then though, at that point, the team that chooses whatever work, again, it's 2 people, 1 programmer, 1 designer, they are completely in charge of figuring out how to do the project itself. So nobody's assigning them tickets. Nobody's assigning them to-dos. Nobody's telling them, there's no like detailed spec. What we give is a broad outline with an idea, with some general guidelines of what we're after and why, and what this thing should do and why we're picking it. And then the team has a ton of autonomy in deciding exactly how to, what we call scope it out, figure out all the bits, what order to do them in, what's worth doing, what isn't worth doing, maybe adding a few things, maybe taking a few things away. So there's a lot of autonomy once the teams are settled in with the project that they're going to work on over that next 6-week cycle. As far as new products, like brand new products, it just happens so infrequently that there's no real pattern here. But historically, David and I, 2 business owners, have been the ones who are sort of thinking about broad new products and sort of kick those ideas off. But a lot of them don't go anywhere. So we'll explore something and like in a month we'll realize it's not going anywhere. So it just doesn't happen that much. This is all sort of detailed. All the product side stuff is detailed in Shape Up, that book. That's free, by the way, online. You can read the whole thing. You don't even need to give us your email address. It's like totally free. And you can really learn about how we come up with the ideas, who shapes them up, the betting table, how we decide what to do, how we scope them out, how we divide them up, how teams take them on, and how teams work through things.
Awesome. There's this related question someone asked about within those 6 weeks, how much time is allocated to thinking and how much time is allocated to doing?
Sure, great question. So when the work is shaped up and a project is chosen to do, 90% of the big picture thinking is done. Mm-hmm. Because if you only have 6 weeks, you can't go into something not knowing what you're going to do. It's just, you're going to use up all the time. So the idea is for me and my team to think through all this stuff ahead of time, big picture, so we can deliver something that people can wrap their heads around. And then, of course, there's a lot of thinking that goes into how do you break that idea down into its component parts and how to approach them and in what sequence to approach them and all the design decisions and all the programming implementation. That's all thinking too. But what I want to stress is that by the time the work is assigned, the project is formed up and shaped up, we think we've covered all of the big picture cases that we really care about. And there should be no real big unknown mysteries. Because if you have those, you're in trouble from the start. So we want to make sure all the mysteries are out of the way, but then all of the implementation, design, idea thinking, sequencing. That's all thinking too, very important thinking. And that happens all throughout the project. And there's continuous discussion about what's worth doing, what isn't worth doing. Gosh, we only have 3 weeks left. I thought we had more time. We only have 3 weeks. We're going to cut some stuff out of here. What are we going to cut? What's worth cutting? Can we cut something completely, or do we cut this feature down by 30% or 40%, or can we do it a different way? For example, I'll give you a very concrete example. I haven't been speaking concretely enough tonight, and I want to get into some concrete stuff. We're doing a project right now. We're adding an autoresponder to Hey. So we don't have an autoresponder in Hey. So if you go on vacation, Hey is not going to autorespond currently. We're going to add that. Now, when you think of an autoresponder, you think of like typically a date range. Like if you look at Gmail, they have a date range. Like I'm out of town from November 4th to November 8th. Okay. That's one way to do it. And we started out thinking about it that way. But as we got into this, the project was assigned and that was the approach. But as the team got into it, they started thinking like, what's an even simpler way to get something built sooner that we can use and then maybe layer in date ranges. So they said, what if we just had an on-off toggle? It's like it's on or it's off. And when you leave for vacation, you turn it on. And when you come back, you turn it off. It's much, much simpler than setting up dates and cron jobs and like all this other stuff. So we're starting there. That was the team thinking through how to simplify the idea. And now that we have that, we'll use that earlier because we have it built sooner. And we might realize, you know what, it's not quite enough. We do want to have dates, so we can layer dates in afterwards. But this is the process of continuing to squeeze this thing down to the smallest possible components and figure out how to get something built sooner so we can use it more as we're building the feature itself.
I'm actually quite excited for that functionality to come live because I'm about to go on a long trip and I don't know how long it's going to last. So
right, there you go.
I don't know what deadline to put, you know.
The other thing that's interesting, if I can continue on that, is that by simplifying it, it actually makes the product more flexible. So this is interesting because we were thinking about, you have date ranges, okay? So you have like on-off, basically date ranges. But what some people I know, like if you email some people, they'll always send you an autoresponder back. And so some people like perpetual autoresponders because they want to tell you like, hey, here's how I do email. You send me an email, I'll get back to you within 2 weeks. If you need something more urgently, email this other person, the whole thing. And so how do you do perpetual autoresponder if you have dates? Like you have to pick some date far in the future, then you're kind of hacking the system. It's like start date and then like end date 10 years from now. What's cool about on-off is that on-off solves the away on vacation scenario. It also solves the perpetual autoresponder scenario. So by simplifying the idea and actually making it easier to build, also, you actually get two features in one, which is such an interesting way to look at building software. Simplifying can give you more. It's when you train your mind to think that way that you can make enormous progress in a short period of time and leverage simplicity to get more out of it. That's where product development gets really exciting, I think.
Man, that's amazing.
I'll do a blog post on that idea because I think this is a good example of that.
Yeah, like the value of simplicity there. Hey, one last question from the crowd here. And that's from Uni, who's a partner at Impact Collective. No roadmaps and the 6-week rules only, loves it. It seems to move forward quickly without roadmap. By creating a roadmap on the go is possible when all the members clearly understand it and share the same goal and vision. So could you share any tips to lead the team working independently but looking in the same direction? So what I'm getting from this is sort of like, how do you set like a shared goal and direction when you're working in 6-week rhythms?
Yeah, so we that's what this shaping document is. Let me see if I can.
I think someone shared it actually.
I loved. Someone did share like a one that I posted somewhere else.
Yeah, it's basecamp.com/shapeup.
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be the. There's
okay.
What I want to show you is. Can I share my screen? Is it possible for me to do that?
I hope so.
Because if so, I will show you an actual document of an actual feature that we're working on right now.
Yeah, you can. there's actually an up button next to your microphone, and then click share screen.
Okay, cool. Let me just go to it really quick. So, okay, hang on. I know we only have a few minutes, but I will make sure to get this in. Okay, so tell me what to do again. There's an up button. I see it. Yeah. Present to audience. Share screen. Select a window. Well, let's see if this works. This may not work, but I'll try. Darn. I have to I have to give Firefox permission to record the screen, which means I need to quit this app and relaunch it, which is not going to work. Let me see if I can paste. I'll tell you what, Yoseph, is there a way for me to send you something later, which you can then share with this group?
Sure.
Okay, I'll just do that then.
Awesome.
Let me just see if this works. Yeah, I can't
see a lot of thumbs up.
Okay, I'll send you something, which then you can share.
Awesome.
Actually, you know what I could do? I could make this a public. Let me just share something with you later, and then you can share it. So, but awesome. But basically, to answer the question, we write up a document. It's called a shaping document. It's not that long, but it explains the idea in enough detail that everybody understands where we're headed. When we begin the cycle of that work, we do what's called a kickoff call, where we get the team on a call. So it'd be me and the two people who work in the call or the project or whatever. And we walk through the whole thing again and talk about ways to simplify it perhaps, or clarify some things. And they get started. And then they build something. Always within the first week, there's something that's built. And then we can look at the thing that's built and we can discuss the thing that's built. What we're not doing is going off on our own way for weeks or months at a time before we look at anything. Got to look at something soon. And that helps you make sure everyone's headed in the right direction. We know what we're doing together. Because if it's totally way off base, you'll know soon versus waiting too long. That's the problem. So it's actually not very hard to keep everyone on the same page. If you write something that's clear, if you talk it over when you begin, and you look at real work soon, it just, everyone stays on the same page. You start on the same page and you stay there when you're constantly using the work to glue everyone together.
That's amazing, man. I'm hearing a lot of comments here of people being now excited to want to go build new products. So that's really cool.
It's hard. I know maybe I'm making it sound easy. This is a struggle all the time, right? We struggle. Last cycle, a couple of our projects went over a week or two. And that's frustrating for us because we were really pro with this. And it's still, a couple things went a little bit long for a couple different reasons. Also, we just hired a bunch of new people. And so not everyone's up to speed on how we work yet. So we're integrating a lot of new people and new features and new ideas. And so there's always a learning curve here. So the first few times you might try Shape Up, you may totally botch it, but you got to practice just like anything. No one's going to expect you to pick up a guitar and be great at it. That, no one would ever expect that. And so we shouldn't expect ourselves to all be great at a new process. But I do think there's a lot of validity to it, a lot of power in it, and you just need to practice it and dedicate yourself to giving it a shot for a while.
Yeah. Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much for this. I will invite Sungi now because we've got 90 seconds before we move to networking. I know the app will automatically close itself.
Oh, that's cool.
That's quite scary, now we have 80 seconds. So thank you so much, Jason. It's been amazing and inspiring for me personally. And there is so much that I want to talk about another time if we can find some time together. Sure. So guys, this was Impact Collective Fireside Chat. We're going to move on to the networking. So if you have a few more minutes to talk with everybody else who wants to connect with you, and you can join the table. And guys, our community voting has opened and it's going to end the November 12th. But before that, we have a demo day coming up on the 8th and 9th and 10th for 6 different themes, 2 themes a day. And we will send you guys information as well. And whoever joined today, we'll also send you guys the invitation for the demo day. And go out, check out our community site. And then there is already a profile of all the 40 plus teams. And you can vote if you want to become a voter, apply for the community voter, and then we will have you on board with that. 20 more seconds. Thank you so much, everybody, for putting this together. And any last words, guys?
Follow Jason online. He writes a lot of his reflections. So it's kind of like the Bible for products and startups.
Yes, awesome. And follow him on Twitter. Yes, as well.
Very kind. All right, I'll see you all later. I can't stay because it's like nighttime for me.
Yeah.
But thanks again for having me here.
Thanks
for being here, Jason.
All right,
Thanks so
take
much.
care. Bye now.
Speak soon. Bye-bye.